History is not always the story we are told. This journey explores 30 historical mysteries where the official account is shadowed by compelling, unanswered questions. We are not here to endorse wild theories, but to examine the genuine gaps in the record, the strange details that do not fit, and the human fascination with what might lie hidden beneath the surface. By the end, you will have a deeper understanding of why certain stories never feel settled, and how the search for truth can become its own compelling narrative. What happened to a vanished colony, leaving only a single carved word behind? Could a world-famous composer have been silenced for what he knew? We will look at the evidence, weigh the possibilities, and navigate the fine line between fact and enduring legend. What does it say about us when we question the stories written in stone? That single word carved into a wooden post is one of history's most haunting messages. In the year 1590, an English resupply ship finally returned to Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The crew found the settlement utterly empty. Over 100 men, women, and children had vanished. The only clue was not a note, not a map, but that one word, Croatoan, carved into a fort's gatepost, and the letters CRO carved into a nearby tree. It was the name of a nearby island and the Native American people who lived there. The official explanation, one that has persisted for centuries, is that the colonists, facing hardship and dwindling supplies, simply moved in with the Croatoan people for survival. It is a peaceful theory of integration and assimilation, yet the complete lack of any definitive archaeological evidence for this integration is puzzling. No distinct English artifacts from that period have ever been found in Croatoan sites that conclusively prove the colony lived there. Furthermore, the behavior of the English after the disappearance raises questions. Subsequent voyages to the region seem to pointedly avoid a thorough search of Croatoan Island or the mainland areas where the colonists might have been. This has led to a darker interpretation. Some researchers suggest the colony was not just forgotten but deliberately erased. Could the entire venture have been a financial or political embarrassment for its backer, Sir Walter Raleigh? If the colony had failed catastrophically due to poor planning or conflict, revealing that failure could have jeopardized future funding and royal favor for English colonization efforts. The conspiracy proposes that the settlers might have been ordered to disband and assimilate quietly, or met a far worse fate, and that the word Croatoan was not a hopeful sign left behind, but a deliberate red herring, a false trail carved to explain away a disappearance that powerful people needed to remain a mystery. The lost colony stands as a blank space in the historical record, a community that stepped out of the world and left only a whisper behind, a whisper we are still trying to decipher centuries later. That single word left a nation holding its breath for centuries, a mystery of absence. But sometimes history's most chilling conspiracies are not about people who vanished without a trace, but about disappearances where everyone suspects they know exactly what happened, just not who was truly responsible. In the spring of 1483, two young brothers were placed in the Tower of London for their own protection. They were Edward V, the 12-year-old King of England, and his younger brother Richard, the Duke of York. Their father, King Edward IV, had died suddenly, and their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector to guide the young king's reign. Within months, the boys were declared illegitimate. Their uncle was crowned King Richard III, and the princes were never seen in public again. The mainstream historical accusation, immortalized by Shakespeare and Tudor propaganda, is straightforward. Richard III, the archetypal wicked uncle, ordered the deaths of his nephews to secure his stolen throne. It is a powerful, dramatic story that has defined his reputation for over 500 years. Yet, from the very beginning, whispers pointed in another direction. The conspiracy theory asks a simple, brutal question of motive: who benefited most from the prince's death? Richard already held the crown, and the boys, declared illegitimate, were no longer a legal threat to him. Their disappearance, however, created a cloud of suspicion that ultimately helped topple him. The man who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field and became King Henry VII had a far more precarious claim to the throne. He was a distant Lancastrian relation who solidified his rule by marrying the prince's older sister. But the continued existence of the true Yorkist heirs, even if officially illegitimate, posed a perpetual danger to his reign. If they were to reappear, they could become focal points for rebellion. The theory suggests that Henry VII, after taking the throne, found the boys alive in the tower and quietly ordered their passing to remove the last obstacle to his dynasty's future. This would make Richard III not the murderer, but a king tragically framed by his successor. The mystery deepened nearly 2 centuries later. In the year 1674, workers renovating the tower discovered a wooden chest buried beneath a staircase. Inside were the small skeletal remains of 2 children. They were widely assumed to be the lost princes and were given a royal burial. Scientific examinations in the 1930s and again later were inconclusive, unable to confirm the age, sex, or date of the remains with certainty. So we are left with a foundational English mystery. Did a vilified king commit the ultimate crime to gain power, or did the king who wrote the history books commit that same crime to keep it? The bones in the tower tell no tales, leaving us to weigh the shadows of motive against the silence of the grave. A king's fate can be rewritten by the victor, but sometimes a genius leaves behind a silence so profound it begs for a story. In the final months of 1791, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was at the peak of his creative powers, yet he was also a man under immense strain. He was working feverishly, composing his opera The Magic Flute, finishing his clarinet concerto, and laboring on a mysterious, anonymous commission for a requiem mass. Then, in November, he fell suddenly ill. He experienced severe swelling, pain, and fever, and passed away on December 5th at the age of 35. The official record listed the cause as severe military fever, a historical diagnosis often linked to rheumatic illness. For a vibrant young composer to be taken so swiftly by disease was a tragedy, but to many in Vienna at the time, it did not feel like a simple twist of fate. Whispers of foul play began before he was even laid to rest. The most persistent rumor pointed a finger at his contemporary, the court composer Antonio Salieri. The theory of Salieri's poisoning, fueled by professional jealousy, became a cultural legend immortalized in plays and film. While some accounts suggest the 2 men had a respectful rivalry, the idea that Salieri could not bear Mozart's unparalleled talent offered a darkly human motive. Yet, historians find little evidence to support this. Salieri himself was deeply respected and had no clear need to remove his rival, and he was reportedly distraught at the accusation later in his life. A more intricate conspiracy involves the Freemasons, a secretive fraternal society to which Mozart belonged. His final opera, The Magic Flute, is filled with Masonic symbolism, allegories, and rituals presented in a popular, almost light-hearted form. Some theorists suggest Mozart did not just celebrate the order, but potentially revealed secrets or portrayed its rites with too much clarity for the Brotherhood's comfort. Could he have been silenced to protect their mysteries? The anonymous commission for the Requiem, from a man whose wife wished to pass it off as her own composition, added to the aura of ominous mystery, making it seem like a haunting omen of his own death. Modern medical historians, reviewing the symptoms described by his family, suggest a perfect storm of health challenges, perhaps stemming from a streptococcal infection leading to kidney failure. There was no need for poison, yet the conspiracy theories persist because they speak to a deeper unease. Mozart's death feels narratively unjust. How could the universe simply extinguish such a brilliant, specific light through random illness? We invent villains like Salieri or secretive orders because chaos is harder to accept than malice. His unfinished Requiem, which he believed he was writing for his own soul, remains the ultimate testament, a work of genius interrupted, leaving us forever listening for the notes that were never written. A genius silenced leaves a haunting melody of what if, but the murder of a president on the cusp of peace created a national wound that never fully healed. The night of April 14, 1865, at Ford's Theater is seared into American memory. John Wilkes Booth, a famous actor and fervent Confederate sympathizer, entered the state box and shot President Abraham Lincoln. He then leapt to the stage, shouted a Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants," and fled into the night. The official story for many years framed Booth as a deranged lone actor. But the truth, even by the government's own swift investigation, was far more complex. Booth did not act alone. He was the lead actor in a well-coordinated conspiracy. That same night, his accomplices launched simultaneous attacks. Lewis Powell brutally assaulted Secretary of State William Seward in his home, stabbing him multiple times in a vicious attack that Seward miraculously survived. Another conspirator, George Atzerodt, was tasked with killing Vice President Andrew Johnson but lost his nerve and fled. This was a deliberate plot to decapitate the Union government in one bloody evening. The conspirators were quickly rounded up, a military tribunal tried them, and 4, including Mary Surratt, were hanged. The case was closed with brutal efficiency. Yet the speed of these executions and certain missing pieces fueled a deeper, more troubling conspiracy theory. It asks who was truly pulling the strings. Lincoln, in his final days, had begun to outline a vision for Reconstruction that emphasized reconciliation with malice toward none, with charity for all. This lenient approach toward the defeated South horrified a faction known as Radical Republicans in his own government, who wanted a much harsher peace. It also terrified former Confederate leaders who feared being tried for treason. The theory suggests Booth's plot was either knowingly allowed to proceed or actively aided by elements within the U.S. government or the Confederate Secret Service to remove Lincoln and ensure his gentle plans died with him. The most tantalizing piece of evidence is a missing book. Booth kept a diary during his 2-week flight. When it was recovered, several pages had been torn out. The War Department official who possessed it, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a key figure who favored a tougher Reconstruction, never adequately explained why those pages were removed before the diary was entered as evidence. What was on them? Names, funding sources, connections higher up the chain. The mystery of the burned pages and the swift silencing of the conspirators before a full public trial created a permanent shadow over the tragedy. We are left to wonder if the man who jumped from the box was merely the instrument, and if the true architects of that terrible night watched from the wings, their identities lost to the fire and the gallows. The violent end of a president cast long shadows over a nation's soul, but a single torpedo in a calm sea would plunge the world into an even deeper darkness. On May 7, 1915, the luxurious British ocean liner RMS Lusitania was cruising off the coast of Ireland. The waters were part of a declared war zone as Imperial Germany waged unrestricted submarine warfare against Allied shipping. A German U-boat, U-20, fired a single torpedo. It struck the Lusitania's starboard side, followed moments later by a second, much larger explosion from within the ship. In just 18 minutes, the great liner vanished beneath the waves. Nearly 1,200 civilians lost their lives, including 128 Americans. The international outrage was immediate and ferocious. Newspaper headlines screamed of barbarism, and the tragedy became the pivotal propaganda tool that helped draw the United States into the First World War 2 years later. The official narrative was clear. This was an act of German aggression against innocent neutral travelers, but the waters of this story are murkier than they first appear. The conspiracy theory suggests the Lusitania was not an accidental victim, but a deliberate sacrifice. At the time, First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill and British naval intelligence were fully aware of the heightened U-boat threat in that specific corridor. Yet the Lusitania was not given a naval escort, and the cruiser assigned to patrol the area, HMS Juno, was mysteriously recalled to port the day before the attack. This left the liner utterly exposed. More critically, the Lusitania's official cargo manifest listed items like cheese and machinery, but it is now widely accepted by historians that the ship was secretly carrying a significant quantity of war munitions, including millions of rounds of rifle ammunition and artillery shell casings. This contraband, stored in the forward holds, could have been ignited by the torpedo strike, causing the catastrophic secondary blast that doomed the ship so quickly. Furthermore, German authorities had actually taken out newspaper ads in New York papers warning passengers that ships flying the British flag were liable to destruction in the war zone. The theory posits that elements within the British Admiralty, aware of both the cargo and the submarine threat, allowed the Lusitania to sail into a trap. The calculated gamble was that the sinking of a famous passenger liner with American souls aboard would generate such powerful anti-German fury that it would shift global opinion and eventually bring the immense industrial power of the United States into the war on Britain's side. In this light, the tragedy moves from a brutal act of war to something more chilling, a potential chess move on a geopolitical board where civilian lives were considered expendable for a greater strategic victory. The Lusitania rests on the seafloor, a monument to both the lives lost and the haunting possibility that they were lost not just to an enemy torpedo, but to the cold calculus of war itself. The cold calculus of war can sacrifice thousands, but a single family's fate in a basement room would haunt the 20th century. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, in the city of Yekaterinburg, Russia, the deposed Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 loyal servants were led into a small cellar. According to the official historical account, a Bolshevik firing squad carried out their execution on the orders of the local Soviet, ending the 300-year Romanov dynasty. The bodies were then taken to a forest site, disposed of, and for decades the Soviet government maintained that the entire family had perished. Yet, from the very beginning, the story was shrouded in mystery and deliberate obfuscation. The authorities were strangely vague about the details, and no bodies were immediately produced as proof. This vacuum of certainty gave birth to one of the most enduring survival legends in modern history. The central figure was the youngest daughter, Grand Duchess Anastasia. Her spirited personality and the fact that she was just 17 made her a symbol of hope. If anyone could have escaped the horror of that cellar, perhaps it was her. For decades, women across Europe and America came forward claiming to be the lost princess. The most famous was a woman known as Anna Anderson, who appeared in Berlin in 1920. She bore scars, knew intimate details of Romanov court life, and displayed a temperament many found convincing. Her dramatic story, that she was rescued by a sympathetic soldier after the shooting, captivated the world and inspired books and films. This fueled a grand conspiracy theory, suggesting the executions were either faked or botched, and that loyal monarchists, perhaps with the secret aid of foreign powers like Britain or Germany, who were related to the Romanovs by blood, had engineered an escape for at least some of the children. The possibility spoke to a deep human desire for a fairy tale ending amidst the revolution's brutality. The mystery seemed to resolve in 1991, when a grave containing 9 sets of remains was discovered in the woods near Yekaterinburg. Forensic science, including dental records and bone analysis, confirmed they were the Tsar, Tsarina, and 3 of their daughters, along with the servants. But notably, the bodies of the Tsarevich Alexei and one of the sisters, either Maria or Anastasia, were missing from that pit. This discovery validated the core tragedy but left a tantalizing gap. Had their remains been destroyed separately, or did their absence fuel the survival stories? The final blow to the claimants came with DNA. In the 1990s, a sample from Anna Anderson was compared to a living Romanov relative. There was no match. She was, in fact, a Polish factory worker with a history of mental illness. Later, in 2007, a second gravesite was found nearby containing the fragmented remains of two young individuals. Genetic testing confirmed they were Alexei and his sister, almost certainly Maria. The scientific case was closed. All 7 family members had died that night. Yet the conspiracy theories did not vanish entirely. They transformed. Now they question not the forensic evidence but the narrative around it. Why did the Soviets so thoroughly obscure the disposal of the bodies? Could the initial confusion have been a deliberate propaganda tactic to allow for deniability or to foment monarchist unrest with false hope? The story of Anastasia endures not because we doubt the science, but because it represents the ultimate historical what-if. It is a testament to our refusal to let a story end in a dark basement, and our endless fascination with the possibility that history just once might have allowed for a miraculous escape. The hope for a royal escape was a comforting fantasy, but the brutal reality found on a vacant Los Angeles lot in 1947 offered no such comfort. On a January morning, a mother taking her child for a walk made a horrific discovery. The body of a young woman had been severed at the waist, meticulously drained of blood, and posed with her arms over her head. Her face bore a grotesque, ear-to-ear smile carved by the killer. This was Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old aspiring actress who would become infamous as the Black Dahlia. The case exploded in the media, becoming a national obsession and one of the most sensational unsolved murders in American history. The official investigation was massive but chaotic, plagued by false confessions and dead ends. To this day, no one has ever been formally charged. The sheer brutality and surgical precision of the crime suggested a killer with medical knowledge, leading police to one of their prime suspects, a prominent and wealthy Los Angeles surgeon. Yet, despite intense scrutiny, he was never arrested. The lack of a resolution, combined with the killer's apparent ability to evade one of the largest manhunts of the era, gave rise to a powerful conspiracy theory. It proposes that Elizabeth Short's killer was not a random madman, but someone with powerful connections, perhaps in the medical establishment, the police force, or the shadowy underworld of Hollywood. Her death, the theory goes, was not just a murder but a message, and the investigation was deliberately steered away from the truth to protect influential people. Some versions suggest Short was killed because of a secret abortion gone wrong, performed by a doctor who then covered his tracks with the horrific disfigurement. Others link her to a Hollywood blackmail ring, where she may have known dangerous secrets about powerful men in the film industry. In this scenario, her very public and terrifying murder served as a warning to others, and the police cover-up ensured those secrets stayed buried. The enduring mystery of the Black Dahlia is not just about who killed her, but about the system that failed to find an answer. In a city built on illusions, her story became the darkest kind of Hollywood noir, a real-life tale where the most compelling script is the one about the clues that were never followed and the doors that were never opened. Hollywood's darkest noir found its tragic icon in a blonde bombshell whose smile hid a world of pain. Marilyn Monroe was found in her Brentwood home on August 5, 1962, the victim of an acute barbiturate overdose. The official ruling was probable suicide, a conclusion that seemed to fit the narrative of a troubled starlet crushed by fame and personal demons. But to many, the pieces of that night never quite fit together. The conspiracy theory that took root suggests her death was not self-inflicted, but a carefully staged murder orchestrated to silence her permanently. At the time of her passing, Monroe was deeply entangled with the most powerful men in America. She had been involved in affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. These were not just tabloid rumors, they were poorly kept secrets in political and Hollywood circles. More critically, Monroe was said to have kept a private diary, a red book in which she allegedly recorded not just her personal heartaches, but pillow talk that touched on matters of national security, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to covert operations involving the CIA and organized crime. She had become, in the eyes of some theorists, a walking security breach. The mystery deepens in the hours leading up to her death. Her housekeeper reported last seeing her alive around 8 p.m., but Monroe's body was not discovered until after 3 a.m. What happened in those missing hours? Phone records showed calls were placed from her home late into the evening, but the logs from that night mysteriously vanished. The initial police investigation was notably irregular, with reports of evidence being moved or mishandled, and a lack of thorough forensic examination that would be standard in any high-profile death. The conspiracy weaves these threads into a chilling tapestry. It proposes that Monroe, having been cast aside by the Kennedy brothers and feeling used and threatened, planned to go public with what she knew. This, the theory states, was an unacceptable risk. To protect the presidency and state secrets, a decision was made to eliminate her. The alleged mechanism ties back to the shadowy alliances of the Cold War. The CIA, through its documented operations like Project MK-Ultra, had connections to underworld figures. It is suggested that a hit was arranged using these channels, making her death look like a suicide, perhaps by administering a lethal enema of barbiturates while she was sedated. Her psychiatrist, who had prescribed the pills, was also controversially connected to the Kennedys, while historians and biographers largely dismiss the murder plot, citing her documented history of mental health struggles and substance use. The unanswered questions remain potent. Why the compromised investigation? Where did those missing hours go? The story of Marilyn Monroe's death endures not just as a Hollywood tragedy, but as a fable of the modern age, a warning about what can happen when immense beauty, immense power, and immense secrets collide in the dark. It asks us who truly holds the pen that writes the final line of a person's story. That collision of secrets and power in a Hollywood bedroom finds its grim echo on a sunny Dallas street just over a year later. A president's motorcade turns onto Elm Street, and in a few chaotic seconds the world changes. The Warren Commission, tasked with investigating the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, delivered a definitive conclusion in 1964. A lone, troubled gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone and without any conspiracy, fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas Schoolbook Depository. This is the official story, built on ballistics, witness testimony, and Oswald's own background. Yet, from the moment that report was published, a majority of the American public felt a deep, instinctive disbelief. The conspiracy theories that emerged are not a single idea, but a web of competing frameworks, each pointing at a different shadowy power. The most immediate challenge came from the physics of the event itself. The infamous Zapruder film, the home movie that captured the assassination in stark, jerky detail, appears to show Kennedy's head snapping violently backward and to the left after the fatal shot. To many viewers, this suggests a shot from the front, from the famed grassy knoll, not from behind where Oswald was positioned. This visual evidence gave birth to the persistent theory of a second shooter. Then there is the magic bullet. Commission investigators posited that a single bullet, Warren Commission Exhibit 399, caused 7 wounds in both President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally, who was seated in front of him. This bullet was found on a hospital stretcher in nearly pristine condition. Skeptics argue the trajectory is implausible, and the bullet's state defies the damage it supposedly caused, suggesting perhaps a second bullet was missed or planted, complicating the simple 3-shot narrative. If Oswald was not alone, then who was with him? One major framework points to intelligence agencies. Kennedy had famously clashed with the CIA over the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba and was pursuing back-channel communications with the Soviet Union. Some theorists propose that hardline anti-communist elements within the CIA, possibly allied with militant anti-Castro Cuban exiles betrayed by the Bay of Pigs failure, orchestrated the hit to prevent Kennedy from softening Cold War policies. Another powerful suspect is organized crime. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had launched an unprecedented crusade against the mafia, and the mob felt doubly betrayed after some allege they helped deliver Illinois for Kennedy in the 1960 election. Removing the president would, in theory, end his brother's aggressive prosecution. A final, broader theory implicates what President Eisenhower had warned about in his farewell address, the military-industrial complex. Kennedy was reportedly moving to withdraw advisors from Vietnam and seek détente with the Soviets, a direction that threatened the profits and power of defense contractors. A coup by these entrenched interests, the theory suggests, installed a more compliant Lyndon Johnson. Adding eerie weight to these theories are the mysterious deaths of numerous individuals connected to the case. Over the years, dozens of witnesses, from reporters to minor figures, met untimely ends, often under strange circumstances. While statistically these deaths can be explained individually, their collective pattern fuels the belief that a cleanup operation was in motion. The Kennedy assassination remains the grand puzzle of American history. It is a single, terrible event that splintered into 1,000 conflicting truths. We are left not with one mystery, but with a hall of mirrors where every answer only reveals another, deeper question about who truly holds power and what they might do to keep it. The hall of mirrors surrounding a president's death leaves us questioning reality itself, a feeling all too familiar in our modern, interconnected world. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur bound for Beijing with 239 people on board. Less than an hour into the flight over the Gulf of Thailand, the Boeing 777 vanished from air traffic control radar. The official investigation, after years of painstaking work, concluded the most likely scenario was a deliberate act by someone in the cockpit. The theory suggests the captain, who had a flight simulator at home with a plotted course deep into the southern Indian Ocean, manually switched off the aircraft's communication systems, turned the plane around, and flew for hours on a mysterious southern route until it ran out of fuel and crashed. This points to a tragic case of mass murder-suicide, yet the sheer scale of the disappearance in an age where we assume constant digital surveillance felt impossible. This technological dissonance gave birth to a host of intricate conspiracies. The first revolves around the cargo. The flight was carrying a significant shipment of lithium-ion batteries, which can pose a fire risk but also more intriguing items. Some reports indicated there were thousands of pounds of a specialty electronics component, and that several employees from a Texas-based semiconductor firm were on board. This led to theories that the plane was hijacked not for people, but for its cargo, either for valuable patents or sensitive technology that a state or corporate actor wanted to seize. The plane, according to this idea, was landed at a remote, hidden airstrip. A related theory points to the strange, zigzagging flight path captured by military radar. It showed the plane making a series of turns that seemed deliberate but aimless. Could this have been the result of a remote cyber hijack, a demonstration of a terrifying new form of warfare where a plane could be taken over digitally and flown like a drone? The most persistent location in these landing theories is Diego Garcia, a remote British atoll in the Indian Ocean that hosts a major U.S. military base. Conspiracy forums buzzed with satellite images and claims that the plane was secretly housed there, though both the U.S. and U.K. governments have repeatedly and firmly denied this. The physical evidence, or lack thereof, deepened the mystery. For years, despite an international search effort costing hundreds of millions of dollars, only a few confirmed pieces of debris washed ashore on islands thousands of miles from the primary search zone. The main wreckage has never been found. Adding to the confusion were the conflicting and often delayed statements from the Malaysian government in the initial days, which sowed deep distrust. The disappearance of MH370 is a 21st century ghost story. It is a reminder that despite our satellites and instant communication, vast stretches of our planet remain opaque, and that the official story, no matter how probable, must compete with the human mind's refusal to accept that 239 souls and a 250-ton machine could simply dissolve into the ocean without a clear, satisfying reason. We are left staring at a blank spot on the map, inventing narratives because the void of no answer is perhaps the most unsettling mystery of all. A void in the ocean challenges our trust in technology, but a story from the Second World War suggests we may have once mastered forces far stranger than radar. In the summer of 1943, according to a persistent legend, the U.S. Navy conducted a secret experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Their goal was nothing less than to render a warship, the USS Eldridge, invisible to enemy radar and perhaps even to the naked eye. The alleged method involved generating intense electromagnetic fields around the vessel. Witnesses reported a greenish fog enveloping the ship before it vanished completely, not just from sight but from its location, only to reappear moments later in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away before blinking back to Philadelphia. The side effects on the crew were said to be catastrophic. Men were found fused with the ship's metal structures, driven to madness or suffering from severe illness, with some reportedly vanishing entirely. This tale, known as the Philadelphia Experiment, is a cornerstone of modern conspiracy lore, suggesting a breakthrough in cloaking or even teleportation technology so dangerous it was buried forever. Its origins, however, are murkier than the green fog it describes. The story first gained wide circulation in the 1950s from a single individual, Carl Allen, who wrote a series of rambling letters to an author under the name Carlos Allen. He claimed to have witnessed the event from a nearby merchant ship. His account was filled with inconsistent details and pseudo-scientific jargon, and he could provide no verifiable proof. Researchers later found that the USS Eldridge was not even in Philadelphia on the date he specified, its logs placing it elsewhere entirely. The Navy has consistently and flatly denied the experiment ever occurred, attributing it to a mixture of mistaken identity, the misinterpretation of routine degaussing procedures used to protect ships from magnetic mines, and pure fabrication. Yet the conspiracy theory endures because it taps into a profound fascination. It proposes that in the desperate crucible of war, scientists like Albert Einstein might have been enlisted to explore radical physics beyond our understanding, and that the resulting accident was so horrific it demanded a total cover-up. This narrative later expanded, connecting in conspiracy circles to the so-called Montauk Project, a purported series of follow-up experiments in time travel and mind control. The Philadelphia Experiment is less a historical mystery and more a modern myth. It reflects our awe and fear of invisible forces, the enduring suspicion that governments hide world-altering technologies, and the chilling idea that progress can come at an unthinkable human cost. It asks us what we would believe about the limits of science if the official record is all we are allowed to see. A modern myth of invisible ships hints at secrets buried by wartime urgency, but another event from that same summer would become the cornerstone of a far grander hidden history. Just weeks after the alleged Philadelphia experiment, something fell from the sky onto a remote sheep ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. In July of 1947, rancher Mac Brazel discovered strange debris scattered across his land, tinfoil-like material that wouldn't tear, lightweight beams marked with unusual symbols, and other unidentifiable fragments. He reported his find to the local sheriff, who contacted the nearby Roswell Army Airfield. The base's intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, visited the site and collected the material. What happened next ignited a firestorm. On July 8th, the Army issued a stunning press release stating they had recovered a crashed flying disc. The local newspaper, the Roswell Daily Record, ran the headline with breathless excitement. Yet within 24 hours, the story completely changed. A new statement from a senior officer retracted the flying disc claim, announcing instead that the debris was from a crashed weather balloon. Major Marcel was photographed with mundane balloon material, and the incident was presented as a simple case of mistaken identity. The official case was closed, and the story faded from public view for decades. But the seeds of a monumental conspiracy had been planted. The theory, which exploded into popular culture in the 1970s and 80s, asserts that the initial press release was the accidental truth. The object was not of this world. It was an extraterrestrial vehicle, and its wreckage, along with the remains of its non-human pilots, was recovered by the military. The cover-up, known as Project Mogul, was a later invention, a convenient excuse to explain away the strange materials. Project Mogul was indeed a real, highly classified program. It involved launching trains of high-altitude balloons equipped with sensitive microphones to detect sound waves from Soviet atomic bomb tests. The materials described by witnesses, the unusual foil, the lightweight structural beams, could plausibly match such advanced balloon arrays. For skeptics, this is the definitive answer, but for believers, Mogul is the perfect cover. Its secret nature explains the military's initial confusion and subsequent need for a story, and its exotic components explain the strange debris without confirming its otherworldly origin. The conspiracy is fueled by compelling, later testimonies. Witnesses, including military police who guarded the crash site and nurses from the base hospital, came forward years later claiming to have seen not just wreckage, but small, non-human bodies with large heads and slender limbs recovered and whisked away. Others spoke of intimidation and sworn secrecy. The changing official narratives added to the distrust. In the 1990s, the U.S. Air Force released a new report acknowledging the Mogul project, but also introducing a new explanation for the alleged alien bodies. They suggested they were likely anthropomorphic test dummies used in high-altitude balloon drops that civilians might have mistaken for extraterrestrials. To critics, this felt like yet another shifting story, an attempt to plug holes in a decades-old lie. Roswell is more than a single incident. It is the birthplace of modern UFO mythology and the archetype of the government cover-up. It asks a fundamental question about authority and truth. When official stories change, is it because of new evidence or because the first story was too dangerous to tell? The ranch in New Mexico remains a pilgrimage site, not for what we found there, but for what we believe might have been taken away. The mystery of what we are told versus what we believe finds a tragic figure in a man who seemed invincible. On July 20, 1973, the world learned that Bruce Lee, the 32-year-old martial arts icon who had redefined physical cinema, had passed away in Hong Kong. The official cause was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain. The coroner ruled it a tragic reaction to a prescription painkiller he had taken for a headache, calling it death by misadventure. It was a medical anomaly that felt a global symbol of strength, a conclusion that felt deeply unsatisfying to millions of fans. How could a man in peak physical condition, a master of bodily control, be taken by something so mundane? The void left by his sudden absence quickly filled with darker theories. One persistent idea pointed to rival martial arts schools. Bruce Lee had broken tradition by teaching Chinese martial arts to Westerners and creating his own hybrid style, Jeet Kune Do. This was seen as a profound betrayal by some traditionalists in Hong Kong, who believed he had dishonored centuries of secretive practice. Could a master from a rival school have delivered a legendary dim mak or death touch, a delayed pressure point strike that caused his brain to swell hours later? While this theory draws from martial arts folklore, it speaks to the very real cultural conflict Lee embodied. Another powerful suspect was the Hong Kong triads, the organized crime syndicates deeply embedded in the film industry. Lee was a superstar who commanded his own terms, and his company was about to gain unprecedented control over his projects. If he refused to pay protection money or cooperate with their demands, his removal could serve as a stark warning to others. A third angle looked at jealousy within the film industry itself. His meteoric rise created enemies, and his plans for future films threatened established stars and producers. The conspiracy suggests a rival might have had a hand in tampering with his medication. Adding an almost supernatural layer of unease was the fate of his son, Brandon Lee. 20 years later, in 1993, Brandon was killed on the set of the film The Crow in a freak accident involving an improperly prepared prop gun. The sheer statistical improbability of both father and son dying young in such sudden, high-profile circumstances fueled theories of a family curse or a deliberate multi-generational targeting. While investigations concluded both deaths were tragic accidents, the pattern feels like more than coincidence to the human mind. We struggle to accept that random chance could erase such potent talent twice. The story of Bruce Lee's death endures because it contradicts the myth he built. He taught the world that the body could be perfected into an unstoppable weapon, yet his own body betrayed him in the most ordinary way. The conspiracies, whether about criminal gangs or ancient martial arts secrets, are attempts to give his death a worthy antagonist, to frame his end not as a medical fluke, but as the final, epic battle he never got to fight on screen. The unexplained can claim a legend in his prime, but it can also erase 9 young lives on a remote, frozen mountainside. In February of 1959, a search party made a grim discovery in the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. A hiking tent belonging to a group of 9 experienced university students and athletes was found torn open from the inside, abandoned on the slope of Kholat Syakh, a name meaning mountain of the dead. The searchers followed a trail of footprints, some barefoot, leading into the dark forest below. What they found there defied all rational explanation. The first 2 bodies were discovered near the remains of a small fire, dressed only in their undergarments. 3 more were found between the tent and the tree line, as if they had collapsed while trying to return. The final 4 bodies were not located until months later, under a deep layer of snow in a ravine. These hikers had sustained horrific and bizarre injuries. One had a fractured skull, another had massive chest trauma with all her ribs broken, yet there was no external bruising. A third was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. Several items of their clothing were found to have traces of radioactive contamination. The official inquest, closed in 1959, concluded the group had met with a compelling natural force, likely a sudden avalanche that caused panic. They cut their way out of the tent, fled in terror into the sub-zero night, and succumbed to hypothermia. The strange injuries were attributed to post-mortem animal activity and the crushing weight of snow in the ravine. This explanation has never satisfied investigators or the public. The conspiracy theories that have bloomed around Dyatlov Pass are as varied as they are chilling, each attempting to solve a puzzle where none of the pieces seem to fit. The first major theory points to secret Soviet military activity. The area was known for missile tests, and some researchers suggest the hikers inadvertently camped in a testing zone. A sudden, catastrophic explosion or a test of an experimental infrasound weapon could explain the internal injuries and the panicked flight, with the radiation coming from the weapon's components. Others propose the hikers stumbled upon a clandestine military facility and were deliberately silenced to protect state secrets. A more speculative thread involves the supernatural or extraterrestrial. Local Mansi people spoke of dangerous spirits on the mountain, and some point to the missing facial features as potential evidence of an encounter with a Yeti. Others, noting strange orange spheres reported in the sky that night, suggest a close encounter with a UFO, with the hikers fleeing in terror from an unknown force that inflicted the traumatic injuries. The enduring power of the Dyatlov Pass mystery lies in its specific, haunting details. Why would seasoned mountaineers cut their way out of their only shelter into a lethal blizzard without proper clothing? What natural force breaks ribs without leaving a mark on the skin? Why were some of their belongings arranged in a manner that suggested a ritual? The Soviet government classified the files for decades, and while they were finally released, they provided no definitive answers, only deepening the sense of an official cover-up. This story is not about ghosts or monsters, but about the human mind confronting a sequence of events that logic cannot easily chain together. It stands as a stark reminder that even in our modern age, there are places where the wilderness holds its secrets tightly, and the line between a tragic accident and something far more sinister can vanish in the howling wind. The wilderness can swallow secrets whole, but the glare of a hotel kitchen would expose a political nightmare. In the early hours of June 5, 1968, Senator Robert F. Kennedy walked through the pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. He had just won the California Democratic presidential primary, a victory that positioned him as the frontrunner to possibly end the Vietnam War and heal a fractured nation. As he shook hands with kitchen staff, shots rang out. 5 people were hit. Kennedy, struck 3 times, fell to the concrete floor. The gunman, a 24-year-old Palestinian immigrant named Sirhan Sirhan, was subdued inches away, his revolver emptied. He was arrested, tried, and convicted, and has remained in prison ever since. The official story is one of another lone, disturbed assassin, a man motivated by Kennedy's support for Israel. Sirhan's notebooks, filled with angry ramblings, seem to confirm his singular motive. Yet, almost from the moment the smoke cleared, the physical evidence told a contradictory and deeply troubling story. The core of the conspiracy lies in ballistics and acoustics. The autopsy revealed Kennedy was shot 3 times from behind at point-blank range, with 1 bullet entering just behind his right ear. This fatal wound was caused by a bullet that traveled upward through his brain. Sirhan Sirhan, by all eyewitness accounts, was standing directly in front of Kennedy, never getting behind him. How could a man firing from the front cause a wound indicating a shot from the rear? Then there is the bullet count. Sirhan's gun was a .22 caliber Iver Johnson revolver that held only 8 rounds. The Los Angeles Police Department concluded he fired 8 times, hitting 5 people. Yet a careful tally shows more than 8 bullet holes in the ceiling tiles and door frames of the pantry, and some witnesses reported hearing as many as 12 or 13 shots. This suggests the presence of a second gun. Most compelling is the acoustic analysis. A freelance journalist named Philip Van Prague, and later a forensic audio expert enlisted by the Kennedy family, examined a sound recording from a reporter's tape machine that was running in the pantry. Their analysis identified 13 distinct gunshot impulses. Crucially, the spacing between the shots was too rapid to have been fired from a single revolver like Sirhan's, which requires the trigger to be pulled each time. The pattern suggested 2 guns firing simultaneously. This audio evidence points directly to a second shooter, likely standing behind Kennedy, who fired the fatal shot. If Sirhan was not the sole gunman, then who was he? Witnesses described his demeanor during the shooting as eerily calm, almost robotic, with a vacant look in his eyes. This, combined with his own later claims of having no memory of the shooting, fueled speculation that he was a programmed assassin, a hypnotized patsy. The theory suggests he was conditioned, perhaps by intelligence assets or other groups threatened by RFK's anti-war stance and his vow to end the conflict in Vietnam, to act as a distraction while the real killer executed the plan. Who would want Robert Kennedy dead? The list is long and shadowy. It includes the same factions that may have opposed his brother, from hardline anti-Castro Cubans and the mafia to elements within the military-industrial complex that profited from the ongoing war. His promise to withdraw from Vietnam made him a dangerous figure to powerful interests. The official investigation was criticized for its haste and its refusal to seriously pursue the multiple shooter theory, leaving critical evidence uncollected and witness statements ignored. The murder of Robert Kennedy shattered the hope of a generation. It also left behind a crime scene that, under scientific scrutiny, refuses to align with the simple story of one man and one gun. We are left with the haunting echo of too many bullets, a trajectory that defies geometry, and the chilling possibility that the man who pulled the trigger in front of the cameras was merely a decoy in a far darker play. The echo of a second gunman faded, but another American icon would soon meet an end shrouded in just as much doubt. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in the bathroom of his Graceland mansion. He was pronounced dead at the age of 42. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, a heart condition brought on by years of prescription drug abuse. The king of rock and roll, bloated and isolated, had succumbed to the very lifestyle his fame had created. It was a tragic but seemingly straightforward end to a life lived at a destructive pace. Yet for legions of devoted fans, that straightforward story never added up. The conspiracy theory that took hold is perhaps the ultimate expression of fandom's denial. It proposes that Elvis Presley did not die that day. He faked his own death to escape the crushing, gilded cage of his celebrity. The pressures were immense, the constant scrutiny unbearable, and his financial situation was reportedly a tangled mess. Faking his death, the theory goes, was the only way he could finally live a normal, anonymous life. This idea is bolstered by strange anomalies. His grave marker at Graceland famously misspells his middle name. He was born Elvis Aaron Presley, but the stone reads Elvis Aaron Presley with an extra A. To believers, this was no engraver's error. It was a deliberate signal, a coded message to those in the know that Aaron, spelled the biblical way, signified he had entered a new life. Even more compelling to theorists were the alleged mechanics of the cover-up. In the years before his passing, Elvis had cultivated a surprising relationship with federal law enforcement. He was a fervent anti-communist and, at his own request, was sworn in as a special deputy by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He even presented President Nixon with a handgun and received a federal narcotics agent's badge. Some versions of the conspiracy suggest that in return for his patriotic service as an informant, the FBI helped him stage his demise, providing a look-alike corpse and falsifying the medical records. The fuel for this fire came from a relentless stream of alleged sightings. For decades after 1977, reports placed Elvis everywhere from a Michigan grocery store to a small town in Argentina. He was seen pumping gas, buying stamps, and living quietly under an assumed name. Each grainy photo and second-hand account was devoured by believers as proof their king had simply walked away. The official explanation for the heart failure, supported by his personal physician's later legal troubles, points to a simple, sad reality of addiction and decline. But the faked death theory endures because it offers a different kind of closure. It transforms a story of self-destruction into one of liberation. It allows the legend to live on, not as a cautionary tale, but as a free man finally at peace, somewhere the spotlight will never find him. It asks us whether we are mourning the man or simply refusing to let the music end. The refusal to let a legend die speaks to our need for hope, but a sprawling airport in the American heartland has become a canvas for our deepest fears. Denver International Airport, opened in 1995 after massive delays and cost overruns, is not just a transportation hub. From the moment travelers step inside, they are greeted by an atmosphere that feels deliberately unsettling, a collection of bizarre art and architecture that has spawned one of the most elaborate modern conspiracy theories. The theory posits that DIA is far more than an airport. It is the surface entry point to a vast, secret underground city or bunker complex, built to shelter the global elite during a coming apocalyptic event, and is a key headquarters for the so-called New World Order. The evidence, according to believers, is hidden in plain sight. First are the now infamous murals. In the main terminal, a series of massive paintings by artist Leo Tanguma depict scenes of jarring violence and sorrow. One shows a giant soldier in a gas mask holding a rifle and a sword, standing over a dead dove and a broken sword, with children of various ethnicities cowering nearby. Another mural features a massive coffin with a slain woman inside, surrounded by grieving figures and dying animals. The artist stated his theme was the triumph of peace over war and the destruction of nature, but to conspiracy theorists, these are not allegories. They are literal prophecies, a preview of the chaos and depopulation the elite are preparing for, displayed arrogantly for the public to see but not understand. Then there is the statue. Outside the main entrance stands a 32-foot-tall, bright blue fiberglass sculpture of a rearing horse. Its eyes glow a demonic, piercing red at night. The artist titled it Mustang, but locals call it Lucifer. The statue's creation was itself marked by tragedy when a piece of it fell and killed its sculptor. To theorists, this is no coincidence. It is a modern gargoyle, a guardian demon placed to watch over the entrance to an underworld. The airport's dedication stone adds another layer. A large Freemasonic-style capstone laid in 1994 bears a cryptic inscription. It reads in part that the airport is dedicated to the people of Colorado and to all mankind, and that it was built under the sign of the New World Airport Commission. No such commission has ever been verified to exist. The phrase New World was all the confirmation needed for those who see the shadowy hand of a New World Order in global affairs. Finally, there is the sheer scale and strangeness of the construction. The airport was built vastly over budget at a final cost of nearly $5 billion and opened 16 months late. Its runways form a perfect swastika shape when viewed from above. A detail planners insist was an unintended consequence of optimal runway alignment. More importantly, the airport sits on 53 square miles of land, an area larger than Manhattan, with an unusually low number of gates for its size. This, combined with mysterious ventilation shafts and unexplained, heavily secured construction zones, fuels the belief that the real facility is not above but below. The official explanations are mundane. The art is provocative but thematic. The horse is a stylized tribute. The capstone wording is merely ceremonial, and the construction issues were typical of a massive public works project. Yet, the Denver airport conspiracy endures because it synthesizes so many modern anxieties into one location. It touches on fear of government secrecy, distrust of globalist institutions, and a primal dread of impending catastrophe. It transforms a busy airport into a modern myth, a story we tell about where the powerful might be hiding and what they might know about the future that we do not. The sprawling myths of Denver Airport speak to fears of hidden control, but a single car crash in a Paris tunnel would make the world weep for a very public loss. In the early hours of August 31, 1997, a black Mercedes sedan carrying Princess Diana, her companion Dodi Al-Fayed, their driver Henry Paul, and a bodyguard entered the Pont de l'Alma underpass. The car was traveling at high speed, pursued by a swarm of photographers on motorcycles. It struck a concrete pillar, spun, and came to a brutal stop. Dodi Fayed and Henry Paul were pronounced dead at the scene. Diana, critically injured, was extracted and taken to a hospital where she passed away a few hours later. The official investigations, both French and British, concluded this was a tragic accident. The driver, Henry Paul, was intoxicated and under the influence of prescription medication, and he was driving recklessly to evade the aggressive paparazzi. It was a story of celebrity, speed, and a fatal loss of control. Yet for many, this explanation felt incomplete, a convenient narrative that ignored too many strange and troubling details. The conspiracy theories that emerged point not to chance, but to a deliberate, coldly calculated murder. One powerful thread leads directly to the British royal family. Diana, divorced from Prince Charles, was in a serious relationship with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al-Fayed. They were reportedly deeply in love and, according to Dodi's father, were engaged and Diana was pregnant. The theory asserts that the establishment could not tolerate the mother of a future king marrying a Muslim and potentially bearing a child who would be a half-sibling to Prince William. This was seen as an existential threat to the monarchy's image and stability. In this scenario, elements within the royal household or its allied intelligence services orchestrated the crash to eliminate the problem permanently. Another motive centers on Diana's humanitarian work. In the final year of her life, she had become a powerful, global advocate for the banning of landmines, campaigning in Angola and Bosnia. This activism was politically inconvenient, threatening arms manufacturers and government policies. Her death, some believe, silenced a voice that was becoming too influential on the world stage. The evidence cited is a collection of eerie inconsistencies. Witnesses reported a blinding flash in the tunnel just before the crash, possibly from a strobe light used to disorient the driver. A mysterious white Fiat Uno, whose paint was found on the Mercedes, was never conclusively located, leading to speculation it was used to force the car off its path. There were claims that Henry Paul's autopsy blood samples were switched to show higher alcohol levels, and that he was, in fact, a low-level asset for French or British intelligence, suggesting his selection as driver was not random. The official inquests dismissed these points, attributing the flash to camera bulbs, the Fiat to a hit-and-run driver who simply fled, and the blood tests to procedural issues. But in the shadow of such a globally mourned figure, the desire for a reason beyond mere tragedy is overpowering. The death of Princess Diana remains an open wound because it represents the collision of a beloved icon with opaque, powerful institutions. We are left to wonder if a drunk driver and reckless photographers were the only authors of that night, or if they were merely the visible actors in a play whose true directors remain, like the missing white Fiat, lost in the dark. The dark possibility of a staged tragedy in a Paris tunnel finds its most monumental and painful parallel in the clear blue sky over New York City. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the world watched in real time as commercial airliners, hijacked by terrorists, were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. The intense fires, fueled by thousands of gallons of jet fuel, weakened the steel support structures. Within hours, both towers collapsed in a horrific, cascading failure, followed later that day by the unexpected fall of the nearby 47-story World Trade Center Building 7. The official investigation by the National Institute of Standards and Technology concluded the collapses were caused solely by the unprecedented combination of massive structural damage from the impacts and the prolonged, intense heat of the fires. This is the account taught in history books and accepted by the global scientific and engineering communities. Yet, for a significant number of people, the visual and physical evidence presented a different, deeply disturbing story. The controlled demolition conspiracy theory asserts that the buildings, particularly WTC-7, were brought down not just by fire and damage, but by pre-planted explosives or cutter charges. This theory hinges on several key observations that proponents argue defy the official explanation. The first is the sheer speed and symmetry of the collapses. The towers, they note, fell almost perfectly straight down into their own footprints, a hallmark of professional controlled demolitions designed to minimize lateral damage. They point to videos showing what appear to be multiple synchronized explosive squibs or puffs of smoke erupting from the building's floors just ahead of the collapsing wave. The most focused argument centers on World Trade Center 7. This building was not struck by an airplane, yet it collapsed completely in the late afternoon. The official report states that fires, ignited by debris from the North Tower's collapse, caused a critical failure. However, videos show WTC-7 descending in a smooth, rapid, and symmetrical manner that critics describe as a textbook free fall for several seconds. In physics, free fall suggests a near-total loss of structural resistance, which they argue fires alone could not have achieved. Another pillar of the theory is the presence of molten metal. For weeks after the attacks, rescue workers reported pools of molten steel in the subterranean wreckage, a phenomenon requiring temperatures far exceeding what hydrocarbon fires can typically produce. This led to the hypothesis that a high-temperature incendiary like thermite, a material used in military and industrial cutting charges, was present and used to slice through core support columns. Finally, theorists highlight the perceived inadequacies of the initial investigation, the rapid disposal of the steel evidence before full independent analysis, and the fact that Building 7's collapse was reported on news networks before it actually happened, which some interpret as evidence of foreknowledge. The overarching conspiracy proposes that factions within the U.S. government or shadowy elite groups had forewarning of the attacks and allowed them to happen, or even actively orchestrated them, using pre-planted explosives to ensure the tower's destruction. The motive in this narrative was to create a catalyzing event, a new Pearl Harbor that would justify wars in the Middle East, unleash a surveillance state, and reshape global geopolitics. The scientific and engineering consensus robustly counters each point, explaining the collapse mechanics through detailed models, noting that the observed squibs are bursts of air forced out by collapsing floors, and attributing the molten material to intense but localized chemical fires from burning office contents. Yet the theory's endurance speaks to a profound rupture in public trust. When an event is so catastrophic, so visually surreal, and so geopolitically transformative, the human mind searches for a cause proportional to the effect. A plot by 19 hijackers can feel insufficient to explain the toppling of modern giants. The controlled demolition theory, whether fact or fiction, ultimately represents a struggle to comprehend the incomprehensible, to find a thread of intentional design in what might otherwise be the unbearable chaos of history. The search for a proportional cause behind earth-shattering events often leads us into the darkest corridors of modern warfare. For nearly a decade after the attacks of September 11th, the world's most wanted man seemed to vanish into thin air. Then, on the night of May 2, 2011, two stealth helicopters crossed silently into Pakistani airspace. Their target was a large, heavily fortified compound in the military city of Abbottabad. In a 40-minute raid, a team of U.S. Navy SEAL engaged in a fierce firefight, ascended to the third floor of the main house, and confronted the man they had hunted for a decade. The official account states that Osama bin Laden was killed in that room by a precise shot, his body positively identified through multiple means, including facial recognition and DNA matching with a known relative. Within 24 hours, in accordance with Islamic tradition, his remains were committed to the sea from the deck of the USS Carl Vinson in the North Arabian Sea. The mission, codenamed Operation Neptune Spear, was presented as a decisive surgical victory, the long-overdue end to a painful chapter. Yet, the extraordinary circumstances of the raid and the immediate disposal of the body ignited a firestorm of alternative theories almost as soon as the White House made its announcement. One major conspiracy suggests the raid itself was an elaborate piece of political theater. This theory posits that bin Laden had actually died years earlier, perhaps of kidney failure or another illness while in hiding. The Abbottabad compound, in this view, was a stage set, and the entire operation was orchestrated to provide a narrative of triumphant closure for the American public, to bolster the presidency, and to symbolically end the war on terror. The swift burial at sea is a central pillar of skepticism. By foregoing a public display of the body or an independent autopsy, the U.S. government relinquished the only irrefutable physical evidence. Officials cited religious sensitivity and a desire to prevent his gravesite from becoming a shrine, but to critics, it looked like the perfect way to dispose of evidence that could not withstand scrutiny. The decision to not release graphic post-mortem photographs, despite some being taken, further fueled doubts. A more sinister variation argues the opposite, that bin Laden was not dead for years, but was very much alive and had been captured, not killed, in the raid. This theory suggests he was taken into custody, interrogated, and then executed, with the firefight story fabricated to avoid the legal and political complexities of a trial. It questions why the world's most notorious terrorist leader was living for years in a city home to a major Pakistani military academy, in a compound with walls 18 feet high and no internet or telephone connection. This conspicuous hideout has led to widespread accusations of Pakistani state complicity, either through deliberate harboring or staggering incompetence within their intelligence service. The official line maintains the Pakistani government was kept in the dark to prevent leaks, but the location feels too improbable for many to accept as mere coincidence. The death of Osama bin Laden stands as a modern paradox, an event where the official story is both widely believed and profoundly distrusted. It represents the final act in a global manhunt, yet it offers no tangible proof beyond the word of the government that carried it out. We are left with a victory announced in the dead of night, a body vanished into the deep, and a compound full of questions that were bulldozed before the world could look inside. A body vanished into the sea leaves us questioning what we are allowed to see, but what happens when our own memories become the evidence of something strange? You are absolutely certain you remember the children's book series being called the Berenstain Bears, spelled with an E. Yet, if you pull a book from the shelf today, the cover clearly reads Berenstain with an A. This is not a simple misprint or a faulty recollection. It is a shared, specific, and deeply held memory experienced by thousands, perhaps millions of people. This phenomenon has a name, the Mandela effect, coined after countless individuals vividly recalled news coverage of Nelson Mandela's passing in prison during the 1980s, an event that did not happen until 2013. It describes those moments where large groups of people remember a historical detail, a logo, or a line from a film in a way that contradicts the documented record. The classic examples are disarmingly simple. Many swear the Monopoly man, rich Uncle Pennybags, wore a monocle. He never did. People confidently recall the villain in Star Wars saying, "Luke, I am your father." The actual line is, "No, I am your father." Some are convinced the map of the world is wrong, insisting New Zealand is located northeast of Australia, not southeast. From a psychological standpoint, the explanation is a fascinating quirk of collective memory. Our brains are not perfect recorders, they are associative storytellers. We remember the gist of things and fill in details with common patterns. Berenstain fits a more familiar spelling pattern in English than the less common Berenstain. A monocle perfectly fits the archetype of a wealthy, old-timey tycoon, so we add it to the mental image. Famous lines get paraphrased in popular culture until the paraphrase overwrites the original. This is how human memory works on a mass scale, a kind of social autocorrect. Yet, for those who experience it, the feeling is profoundly unsettling. It is not just being wrong, it is the visceral certainty that reality itself has been edited. This deep discomfort is where the conspiracy theories take root, offering explanations far stranger than faulty neurons. One theory suggests these are not memory errors, but literal glitches in the fabric of reality. Proponents argue we are living in a simulation, like a vast computer program, and these inconsistencies are minor coding errors that have slipped through an update, revealing the artificial nature of our existence. Another, even more mind-bending idea involves time travel or parallel universes. The theory posits that the Large Hadron Collider, the massive particle accelerator operated by CERN in Switzerland, has conducted experiments so powerful they have accidentally punctured the barrier between alternate timelines. In this view, we have not misremembered the Berenstain Bears. We have, collectively, shifted from a parallel universe where it was spelled with an E into this one where it is not. Our memories are the only baggage we carried across. The Mandela effect is unique among historical conspiracies because the evidence is not in a hidden document or a buried artifact, but inside our own mind. It challenges the most fundamental anchor we have, our personal experience of the past. Whether it is a psychological curiosity or a crack in reality, it forces a humbling question. If we cannot trust our own memories, what can we trust? The answer might be that history is not just written in books, but in the fragile, collaborative story we all tell ourselves about the world we think we know. Deep within a secluded redwood forest in Northern California, a ritual takes place each summer that has become a symbol of elite secrecy. The Bohemian Grove is a 2-week-long retreat for some of the most powerful men in America, a private campground owned by the Bohemian Club of San Francisco. Since the late 19th century, members have gathered here for what is officially described as a period of camaraderie, artistic performances, high-level lectures, and relaxation away from public life. The guest list reads like a who's who of political, corporate, and cultural influence, including former presidents, cabinet secretaries, CEOs of global corporations, and prominent figures from the media and entertainment industries. The public-facing description is one of harmless networking and male bonding, a summer camp for the establishment. Yet, the extreme privacy surrounding the event, the stature of its attendees, and the nature of one particular ceremony have fueled decades of speculation about what truly happens among those ancient trees. The most famous and visually arresting event is the cremation of care. On the first night of the gathering, members assemble before a 40-foot-tall stone owl shrine that overlooks a lake. In an elaborate theatrical production, hooded figures in red robes arrive by boat carrying an effigy named Dull Care. Through chanting and pageantry, they symbolically burn this effigy in the owl's lap, a ritual they describe as releasing members from the burdens of their professional lives so they may enjoy 2 weeks of carefree fellowship. To the members, it is a piece of club tradition, a symbolic play. To outside observers, however, the imagery is deeply unsettling. The massive owl, a symbol often associated with wisdom, but also with occult mysticism in certain traditions, the hooded robes, the firelit ceremony by the water, all contribute to an aura of secret society ritual. This is where the conspiracy theories take root and grow wild. One strand suggests the ceremony is not symbolic at all, but a literal occult practice, a form of pagan worship or a demonstration of allegiance to a dark power. A more extreme and persistent theory, fueled by the ritual's name and imagery, alleges that the cremation of care is a sanitized cover for something far worse, a veiled reference to practices no mainstream society would accept. These allegations, while lacking any credible evidence, persist because of the total blackout on independent observation. The entire 2,700-acre grounds are tightly guarded, and journalists have never been allowed to document the proceedings. This absolute secrecy transforms ordinary activities into subjects of deepest suspicion. Beyond the ritual, the conspiracy focuses on the access and conversations the grove provides. In a setting of complete privacy where no speeches are recorded and no reporters are present, the President of the United States might casually converse with the chairman of a major oil company, a media mogul, and a leading financier. The theory posits that this is not merely socializing, but the world's most exclusive and unminuted board meeting. Here, it is alleged, the broad strokes of global policy, economic shifts, and even wars are not just discussed but agreed upon in principle, away from democratic scrutiny or journalistic oversight. The Grove becomes, in this narrative, the physical embodiment of the shadow government, a place where the real business of power is conducted behind a curtain of rustic tradition and bizarre ceremony. The club and its members dismiss such ideas as paranoid fantasy, maintaining that the Grove is simply a unique retreat for creative thought and friendship. They point to the musical and theatrical productions put on by members, the lakeside lectures on science and literature, and the informal networking that happens in any professional association. Yet, the enduring mystery of the Bohemian Grove is not necessarily about proving the wildest allegations. It is about the psychology of power and secrecy. When the most influential individuals on the planet insist on gathering for a ritual that looks to the outside world like something from a secret order, and then conduct their conversations in a fortress of privacy, they inevitably create a vacuum. Into that vacuum rush our deepest anxieties about who truly controls the levers of society and what they might be willing to do or pretend to do when they believe no one is watching. The stone owl keeps its silent vigil, a monument not to any proven conspiracy, but to the powerful human belief that where there is that much smoke and that much secrecy, there simply must be a fire. The stone owl's silent vigil speaks of power operating behind closed doors, but a jail cell in downtown Manhattan became the stage for a death that seemed to confirm our darkest suspicions about those doors. On August 10, 2019, financier Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He had been awaiting trial on federal charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy, charges that carried the potential for a life sentence. The official ruling, delivered by the New York City medical examiner, was suicide by hanging. A man with everything to lose, facing the collapse of his privileged world, had taken his own life. Yet, from the moment the news broke, the official story was met with immediate, overwhelming disbelief. The conspiracy theory that took hold is stark and chilling. It proposes Epstein did not kill himself. He was murdered to ensure he never took the stand. His death was not an escape, but an execution designed to protect the identities and secrets of the immensely powerful people he had associated with for decades. The physical circumstances of that night are a catalogue of bizarre failures. Epstein was supposed to be on a suicide watch protocol under constant observation. Yet the two guards assigned to check on him every 30 minutes had fallen asleep and falsified their logs. The security cameras outside his cell malfunctioned that specific night, providing no footage of the hallway during the critical hours. The injuries detailed in the autopsy report added another layer of mystery. While consistent with hanging, the fractures noted in Epstein's neck, particularly the hyoid bone, are more commonly associated with homicidal strangulation than with self-inflicted hanging, especially in a man of his age. These medical details, while not conclusive on their own, fueled expert opinions that questioned the suicide finding. Most compelling, however, were Epstein's own actions and words in the days leading up to his death. He had recently been taken off suicide watch. He had just received and was actively reviewing a vast trove of legal documents related to his case. Most tellingly, he had reportedly told his lawyers and others that he feared for his life. He allegedly stated that if anything happened to him, it would not be suicide. In the context of his known associations, this was not the paranoid rambling of a desperate man, but a credible threat assessment. Jeffrey Epstein's little black book was a legend in elite circles, filled with the names of politicians, royalty, academics, and billionaires. His private island, his fleets of aircraft, and his homes were stages for gatherings that mixed the worlds of finance, science, and politics. The conspiracy theory suggests his entire operation was not merely about criminal activity, but about the procurement of compromising material, a sophisticated blackmail scheme. If true, his testimony under oath would have been a seismic event, potentially implicating figures at the highest levels of global influence. His silencing, therefore, was not just about avoiding a trafficking conviction, but about protecting an entire network and preventing the exposure of secrets that could topple careers and destabilize institutions. The implications of this theory are profound. It transforms a jailhouse suicide into a potential act of statecraft or deep state operation. It asks whether the justice system or elements within it can be manipulated to permanently erase a witness whose story was too dangerous to be told. The official investigations have concluded suicide, attributing the security lapses to negligence and incompetence. But in the shadow of so many coincidences, the human mind rebels against the idea of mere incompetence. We are left with a cell that was supposedly both the most watched and the least observed place in America that night, a body with injuries that tell conflicting stories, and a list of names that will now never be read aloud in a courtroom. The death of Jeffrey Epstein stands as a modern riddle, a stark reminder that sometimes the most powerful truth is the one that dies with the only person who could tell it. The silencing of a prisoner in his cell underscores how a single voice can threaten to unravel entire networks of power, but a pathogen invisible to the naked eye would soon challenge the world's understanding of truth itself. In the closing days of 2019, a cluster of unusual pneumonia cases emerged in Wuhan, China. The initial epidemiological trail led investigators to the Huanan seafood wholesale market, a location where live wild animals were sold. The prevailing scientific consensus formed rapidly, suggesting the virus, named SARS-CoV-2, had jumped naturally from an animal host, likely a bat, possibly through an intermediate species like a pangolin sold at the market. This zoonotic spillover narrative had strong precedent, mirroring the origins of the first SARS outbreak and other emerging diseases. It was a tragic but explainable accident of nature. Yet from the very beginning, an alternative explanation whispered through the corridors of global discourse, one that pointed not to a market but to a laboratory just 8 miles away. The Wuhan Institute of Virology was one of the world's leading centers for coronavirus research. Scientists there were known to be conducting studies on bat coronaviruses collected from remote caves, some of which involved gain-of-function research. This is a controversial type of science where pathogens are manipulated in labs to become more transmissible or more lethal in order to study their potential threats to humans. The conspiracy theory, often called the lab leak hypothesis, proposed a simple, terrifying accident. The virus, either in its natural form or a modified state, accidentally escaped from the institute due to a biosafety lapse, infecting a researcher who then carried it into the community. This was not initially framed as a bioweapon, but as a catastrophic failure of containment. The theory was met with immediate and forceful dismissal by much of the scientific establishment and media outlets in early 2020. It was labeled a baseless conspiracy, a racist smear, and a dangerous distraction from the public health response. This dismissal was heavily influenced by the intense geopolitical tensions between the United States and China, with many fearing the theory would be weaponized for political point scoring and inflame anti-Asian sentiment. Adding immense fuel to the doubt was the profound lack of transparency from Chinese authorities. The initial suppression of information by local officials, the denial of access to raw data and lab records for international investigators, and the swift demolition of the Huanan market before a thorough forensic examination could be completed all acted as a powerful accelerant for suspicion. When a narrative is actively obscured, the human mind instinctively questions what is being hidden and why. Then the story began to shift. Over the following year, a group of reputable scientists and journalists began to argue that the natural origin theory, while plausible, was not the slam-dunk case it had been presented as. No direct animal host carrying the identical virus had been found at the market or in farms supplying it. The genetic sequence of the virus showed a peculiar feature, a furin cleavage site that made it exceptionally adept at infecting human cells, a trait some virologists found suspicious. Crucially, the lab leak hypothesis moved from the fringe into a legitimate subject of mainstream scientific debate. In May 2021, a group of 18 prominent scientists published a letter in the journal Science calling for a proper investigation into both natural and laboratory origins, stating that both remained viable possibilities. This was a seismic shift. The conspiracy was no longer a conspiracy, but a competing scientific hypothesis that demanded rigorous scrutiny. The debate that ensued was less about proving one scenario over the other and more about the very nature of scientific inquiry in a politicized world. It highlighted how quickly consensus can harden, how difficult it is to investigate a potential state-level accident, and how the search for a pandemic's origin can become entangled in a thicket of diplomacy, national security, and public trust. The question of how COVID-19 emerged remains formally unanswered, a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, the most dangerous secrets might not be about power or money, but about the very microscopic foundations of life and death. While a microscopic virus reshaped the world through chaos, a far more targeted and personal form of attack seemed to be striking diplomats in the shadows. Beginning in late 2016, American and Canadian personnel stationed in Havana, Cuba, began reporting a bizarre and terrifying array of symptoms. It often started with a high-pitched sound or a sensation of intense pressure in the head. Then came the vertigo, the crushing headaches, the nausea, and a debilitating brain fog that made concentration impossible. Some experienced memory lapses, hearing loss, and problems with balance that lingered for years. This cluster of neurological complaints became known as Havana syndrome. The initial assumption pointed to a sonic weapon, perhaps an audible attack on embassy residences. Yet, official investigations by intelligence and scientific panels gradually shifted toward a more sophisticated and invisible culprit, pulsed microwave energy. The theory suggests that a device, possibly mounted in a vehicle or a nearby building, could direct a focused beam of microwave radiation at a target. This energy, while not heating the skin like a microwave oven, could stimulate the inner ear and brain tissue, creating the phantom sounds and causing the traumatic neurological effects. The official stance acknowledges these directed energy pulses as the most plausible cause, but stops short of naming a perpetrator. This is where the conspiracy theory takes hold with chilling specificity. If these are deliberate attacks, who is behind them and why? The primary suspect in intelligence circles is Russia. For decades, Soviet and later Russian research into non-lethal energy weapons or psychotronic arms has been an open secret in defense communities. The technology to create such effects is believed to exist. The motive, theorists suggest, is multifaceted. It could be a form of harassment, a warning to intelligence officers operating abroad, making their posts unbearable. More strategically, it could be a tool for intelligence gathering. By inducing cognitive impairment and forcing the evacuation of key personnel, an adversary could create gaps in diplomatic and intelligence coverage, weakening a nation's situational awareness in a critical region. The pattern of incidents supports this, with cases later reported not just in Cuba, but in China, Austria, Germany, and even on American soil in Washington, D.C. See, the conspiracy deepens with the question of attribution. Why, if the U.S. government strongly suspects a foreign power, has there been no public reckoning? The theories here split into two troubling branches. The first is that the evidence, while compelling to investigators, remains just shy of the incontrovertible proof needed for a kinetic or diplomatic response, a classic problem of covert action. The second, more unsettling idea is that the truth is known at the highest levels, but revealing it would force a confrontation the government is not prepared to have, exposing both a profound vulnerability and a secret weapons capability it wishes to keep out of public discourse. The victims of Havana syndrome are left in a painful limbo, suffering from very real injuries in a conflict that does not officially exist. Their experience represents a new frontier in asymmetric warfare, one where the battlefield is the human nervous system. The weapon leaves no trace, and the only proof is the shattered health of those who stood in its invisible path. It asks us how we define an act of war when the attack leaves no crater, only a silent, personal devastation that medicine struggles to explain. His final tweet was a promise and a threat. In June of 2021, the eccentric tech pioneer John McAfee was found in his prison cell near Barcelona, having apparently taken his own life. The Spanish authorities ruled it a suicide, a tragic end for a man facing extradition to the United States on charges of tax evasion. He was 75 years old. On the surface, this was the story of a flamboyant, controversial figure, a man who had lived his entire life in the spotlight, finally being cornered by the consequences of his actions. Yet, for anyone who had followed McAfee's chaotic online presence in his final years, his death did not feel like a surrender. It felt like the final, grim confirmation of a narrative he had been writing for a decade. The conspiracy theory asserts that John McAfee was not a man who would ever willingly surrender his freedom, and certainly not his life. He was murdered, the theory states, to permanently silence him. His death was not an escape from justice, but an execution to prevent the exposure of secrets. To understand why this idea took hold, you have to understand the character McAfee had crafted. After selling his namesake antivirus company, he transformed from a software mogul into a kind of digital pirate king, a self-styled prophet of cryptocurrency and a relentless critic of government authority. He lived on a yacht, ran from authorities in multiple countries, and even launched a bizarre, satirical campaign for President of the United States. But his most compelling performance was as a keeper of dangerous secrets. For years, McAfee used his prolific Twitter account as a pulpit, making increasingly dramatic claims. He alleged he possessed terabytes of encrypted data that contained evidence of corruption at the highest levels of multiple governments. He named no specific names in public, but he painted a picture of a shadowy network so powerful that it made his legal troubles over unpaid taxes seem like a convenient pretext. His most famous and chilling declaration was his dead man switch. He repeatedly told his millions of followers that if he were ever to die, especially in custody, the encrypted files would automatically be released to journalists and authorities around the world. The secrets, he promised, would posthumously burn down the houses of the powerful. It was the ultimate insurance policy, a digital version of having an envelope to be opened in the event of his death. Then the Spanish court approved his extradition to the United States. Within hours, he was gone. The timing was, for believers, too perfect to be a coincidence. It was the moment the legal process shifted from possibility to certainty. The point where he would be physically transferred into a system he claimed was controlled by his enemies. The official report stated he hanged himself with a belt, yet questions swirled immediately. How did a man on suicide watch, in a cell that was supposedly checked regularly, acquire the means and the privacy to end his life just as his extradition was confirmed? His widow, Janice McAfee, was vocal in her disbelief, stating he was not suicidal when she spoke to him just before his passing, and that he was determined to fight the charges. She demanded a full investigation, pointing to what she saw as irregularities, and then there was the silence that followed. The promised dead man switch, the torrent of world-altering secrets, never materialized. No files were automatically released. The internet waited and nothing happened. To skeptics, this proved it was all a bluff, the final act of a master showman who had run out of tricks. To conspiracy theorists, the absence of the data was the most damning evidence of all. It suggested the switch had been found and disabled, or that the encryption keys had died with him, precisely as his alleged enemies would have planned. The story of John McAfee's death is a modern fable about truth in the digital age. It pits the official record of a prison suicide against the personal mythology of a man who built his legend on exposing hidden systems. We are left with an impossible choice. Do we believe the clinical findings of an inquest, or do we believe the narrative of a man who told us repeatedly and in detail exactly what his death would mean? In the end, the only thing that was truly switched off was his own voice, leaving behind a mystery encrypted not in data, but in the unsettling gap between a government's report and a dead man's promise. Federal emergency management is a cornerstone of modern governance, a system designed to respond when disaster strikes. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, coordinates relief for hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods, operating from a network of regional offices and logistical centers across the United States. Its public mission is one of protection and resilience, a bureaucratic safety net for the worst of times. Yet, within the darker corners of the internet and certain survivalist circles, these very facilities have been transformed into the setting for one of the most pervasive and chilling domestic conspiracy theories of the last several decades. The theory asserts that FEMA's true purpose is not to save citizens, but to control them. It proposes that the agency's camps and relocation centers are, in reality, a pre-positioned network of secret detention facilities, built to imprison American citizens who dissent against the government during a manufactured national emergency or a staged takeover by a globalist New World Order. This narrative gained powerful traction after events like Hurricane Katrina, when temporary shelters and the presence of military personnel were framed not as aid, but as a test run for martial law and population control. Believers point to specific, real-world locations as evidence. Former military bases like the one in Greenbrier, West Virginia, or the vast Raven Rock Mountain Complex, which are legitimate continuity of government sites, are reinterpreted as future prisons for the masses. They highlight the existence of hundreds of empty, warehouse-like buildings on government property, suggesting these are barracks waiting to be filled. One of the most persistent and visually arresting pieces of evidence cited is the claim about railroad cars. For years, photographs and reports have circulated of standard railroad boxcars discovered in storage, their interiors allegedly fitted with rows of shackles and restraints. While these images are often debunked as showing old prisoner transport cars from a bygone era or even misidentified equipment for livestock within the conspiracy, they are proof positive of a planned industrial-scale system for moving detainees. The legal framework for this feared takeover is said to be hidden in plain sight within a series of presidential executive orders. Documents like Executive Order 13,997, which allows for the seizure of property and transportation systems during a crisis, or older orders concerning the stabilization of the national economy, are presented not as tools for continuity, but as blueprints for dictatorship. When read through the lens of extreme suspicion, their broad language about emergencies and federal authority becomes a recipe for the suspension of the Constitution and the mass incarceration of patriots. The power of the FEMA camp theory lies not in any single piece of irrefutable proof, but in its synthesis of mundane reality into a pattern of malevolent intent. It takes the necessary public machinery of disaster response and reimagines every component as part of a hidden, opposite function. A relief supply cache becomes a stockpile for guards, a training exercise becomes a rehearsal for oppression. This reflects a profound and very human anxiety about the institutions meant to keep us safe. It asks a difficult question: how can we know for certain that the power we grant the state for our protection will never be twisted into a tool for our control? The theory offers a grim answer, suggesting the infrastructure for that control is already built, its pieces scattered across the map, waiting silently for a signal that may never come, but that its believers are certain is part of the plan. Our planet is a sphere, a fact confirmed by every branch of science for over 2 millennia. Yet, in the age of instant global communication and satellite imagery, a belief that feels medieval has found a powerful new voice. The modern flat Earth movement asserts that our world is not a globe, but a flat disk, with the North Pole at its center and Antarctica forming a towering ice wall around the edge that holds in the oceans. The sun and moon are not massive celestial bodies, but local lights circling above the plane. This is not a fringe historical curiosity, but a vibrant, online community that actively rejects the foundational principles of astronomy, physics, and geography. The mainstream scientific consensus is not a matter of opinion, but a mountain of interconnected, observable evidence. We see the curvature of the Earth from high altitude. We watch ships disappear hull first over the horizon. We observe the circular shadow of our planet on the Moon during a lunar eclipse, and we have direct photographic evidence from hundreds of astronauts and thousands of satellites. The very fact that we have time zones, that you can fly an airplane in a straight line and return to your starting point, all of it relies on the simple, elegant geometry of a sphere. So how does a belief so thoroughly debunked by lived experience gain such traction? The answer lies in the conspiracy theory that fuels it. Flat earthers do not simply disagree with scientists, they believe they have uncovered a lie of unimaginable scale. The theory posits that every world government, every space agency, and the entire scientific establishment are engaged in a coordinated, centuries-long cover-up to hide the true, flat nature of Earth. The motive for this global deception is often left vague, but it generally points toward control or religious subversion. Some suggest it is about power, that by convincing humanity we are an insignificant speck on a random globe in a vast cosmos, the elite can strip away divine purpose and make us easier to manipulate. Others see it as a direct attack on biblical cosmology, with the round Earth model serving to undermine scriptural authority. At the heart of this belief is a radical reinterpretation of all evidence. Photographs from space are dismissed as elaborate digital forgeries, created by a complicit Hollywood-style special effects industry working for NASA. The experience of astronauts is explained away as actors participating in an elaborate hoax. They're training a form of method acting. Even simple observations are reframed. The lack of visible curvature from an airplane window is taken as proof, while the scientific explanation of the scale involved is rejected as obfuscation. The movement is a masterclass in alternative epistemology, building a self-contained universe of logic where any contradictory fact is simply more proof of the conspiracy's depth. But to view flat Earth belief only as a failure of science education is to miss its deeper, symbolic power. It is the ultimate expression of distrust in authority. In a world where institutions from media to medicine have lost public confidence, the flat Earth theory takes that skepticism to its logical extreme. If they can lie about something as fundamental as the shape of the ground beneath our feet, what else is a fabrication? It becomes a purity test, a way to declare independence from all official narratives. The community offers a powerful sense of belonging to those who feel alienated by a complex technocratic world, replacing feelings of insignificance with a sense of heroic awakening. The shape of the Earth, then, is almost secondary. The real story is about a profound human need to feel that one has seen through the illusion, to hold a truth that the rest of the world, in its supposed sophistication, has missed. It is a rebellion against the feeling of being a passive consumer of reality, and a poignant, if misguided, attempt to reclaim a sense of wonder and certainty in a dizzyingly complicated universe. The need to feel we have seen through an illusion finds its most spectacular stage not on Earth, but on the surface of the Moon. On July 20, 1969, an estimated 600 million people around the globe watched a grainy, black and white broadcast as astronaut Neil Armstrong descended a ladder and stepped onto the lunar dust. His words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," became the defining soundbite of human achievement. The Apollo 11 mission returned with hundreds of pounds of moon rocks, thousands of photographs, and the testimony of 12 men who walked there. The scientific and historical consensus is absolute. Humanity went to the moon. Yet, almost from the moment the Eagle landed, a counter-narrative began to whisper, one that claims the entire event was an elaborate cinematic fraud, filmed on a soundstage to win the Cold War space race. This is the moon landing hoax, perhaps the most famous conspiracy theory of all time. The theory's framework is compelling in its simplicity. It suggests that the technological hurdles of the 1960s were simply too great. The computer power guiding the mission was less than that of a modern digital watch, and the intense radiation of the Van Allen belts should have been fatal to the crew. Faced with the political imperative to beat the Soviet Union, the theory states the United States government, with NASA cooperation, decided to fake it. The director of this grand production, according to a popular sub-theory, was none other than Stanley Kubrick, the meticulous genius behind 2001: A Space Odyssey. His film had just set the standard for realistic space visuals, making him, in the eyes of believers, the perfect man to simulate a lunar landscape. The evidence for the hoax, proponents argue, is hidden in the footage and photographs themselves. They point to the American flag, which appears to wave and ripple in the broadcast. On an airless moon, they ask what wind could cause that movement. They highlight the strange, non-parallel shadows cast by the lunar lander and the astronauts, suggesting multiple light sources like studio spotlights rather than a single, distant sun. They note the complete absence of stars in the black sky of every lunar photograph, a void that seems suspicious for such a pristine vantage point. Each anomaly is presented as a cinematic mistake, a clue that the set designers and film crew accidentally left behind. Every one of these points has a clear scientific explanation. The flag's movement occurred only as the astronauts were planting it, the inertia from their actions causing the flexible pole to vibrate, creating ripples in the taut fabric, after which it hung motionless. The complex, cratered terrain and the reflective nature of the lunar soil scatter light in ways that create soft, converging shadows, not the sharp, parallel ones we expect on Earth. As for the stars, the cameras were set with very fast exposure times to capture the brightly sunlit lunar surface and the white spacesuits, rendering the relatively faint stars invisible, just as they are in daytime photographs taken from Earth orbit. The moon rocks, studied by scientists worldwide and impossible to falsify, contain isotopes and formations that could only have formed in an airless, low-gravity environment utterly unlike Earth. So why does the hoax theory persist with such stubborn vitality? Its power is not in its evidence, but in its role as the ultimate symbol of institutional distrust. It transforms the most unifying achievement of the 20th century into the ultimate government lie. In a world where we are constantly exposed to sophisticated special effects, the theory asks a seductive question: how can you ever truly know what is real? It allows an individual to feel a sense of intellectual superiority, to believe they alone have spotted the flaws in a grand performance that fooled billions. The moon landing hoax is less about lunar geology and more about earthly psychology. It is a cultural touchstone for a very human desire to believe that authority, especially in its most triumphant moment, might be hiding something, and that the truth is always waiting to be discovered by those who look closely enough at the shadows. The ultimate act of distrust questions the very stage upon which our history has played out. What if the stage itself is not real? This is not science fiction, but a serious philosophical argument known as the simulation hypothesis, proposed by thinkers like Nick Bostrom. His reasoning is a fascinating chain of logic. First, he suggests that if a civilization reaches a post-human level of technological maturity, it would likely possess computing power vast enough to run incredibly detailed simulations of its own history or countless variations of it. Second, such a civilization might choose to run many of these simulations, perhaps for research or entertainment. If that is true, then the number of simulated minds could vastly outnumber the minds in the original, base reality. Therefore, statistically, it is more likely that we are living in one of those many simulations than in that singular, original physical universe. It is a dizzying idea that our sunsets are memories, and the very ground beneath our feet might be lines of code in an unfathomably advanced computer. This philosophical proposition, however, has a darker, conspiracy-adjacent shadow. If we are in a simulation, who is running it, and do some people know? The theory suggests that certain elites, whether modern billionaires in Silicon Valley or ancient secret societies, might have uncovered clues to this truth. Through advanced meditation, occult practices, or even bleeding-edge physics, they have glimpsed the source code. With that knowledge comes the potential to manipulate it. Could immense, inexplicable wealth be the result of someone finding a cheat code in the system? Could political power stem from an understanding of the simulation's core algorithms? This idea transforms our world into a game where a privileged few have accessed the developer console, while the rest of us are merely non-player characters following a programmed narrative. This framework also offers a new lens for unexplained phenomena. The strange coincidences, the eerie synchronicities, the Mandela effects where our collective memory seems to glitch, all become potential artifacts of the simulation. A software update might subtly alter a historical detail, leaving a residue in our minds. A déjà vu moment could be a brief buffer error. The idea of predestination is reframed not as divine will, but as the predetermined output of a complex program. The appeal is profound. It provides an answer, however unsettling, for the fundamental strangeness of existence. It explains why the universe seems to follow mathematical rules, why quantum particles behave in such bizarre, probabilistic ways, and why we sometimes feel like we are living in a story whose plot we cannot see. It turns the mystery of life into a technical problem, one that might someday be debugged or even hacked. Ultimately, the simulation hypothesis is the final frontier of conspiracy thinking. It does not just question who controls the government or hides the truth about history. It questions the nature of reality itself, proposing that every mystery we have ever explored, from lost colonies to political assassinations, might be part of an elaborate narrative designed by an intelligence we cannot begin to comprehend. It asks us whether we are seekers of truth or merely characters in a story whose author we will never meet. From simulated worlds to lost colonies, these 30 mysteries share a single, powerful heartbeat. They are not just stories about what might have happened, but about the human need for a story itself. In every case, from the princes in the tower to the files that never leaked, we are confronted with an official narrative that feels, for some reason, incomplete. Perhaps there is a missing body, a contradictory piece of evidence, or a powerful institution that benefits from a certain version of events. Into that gap of uncertainty, the conspiracy theory flows, offering an alternative plot where hidden actors pull the strings and nothing is as it seems. These narratives are psychologically compelling because they restore a sense of agency to a chaotic world. It is often more comforting to believe in a villain than in blind chance, in a deliberate plot rather than a tragic accident or a simple mistake. They transform us from passive observers of history into active detectives, piecing together clues that the authorities have overlooked or suppressed. This quest gives meaning to the unexplained and offers a sense of control, a secret knowledge that sets the believer apart from the mainstream. Historically, these theories are persistent because they often reflect genuine anxieties about power. They ask who truly benefits, who has the means to cover something up, and what truths might be too dangerous for the public to know. In a way, they serve as a shadow history, a running commentary on our distrust of governments, elites, and official sources. They remind us that history is written by the victors, but it is questioned by everyone else. The journey through these ideas is not an endorsement, but an exploration of the human imagination under pressure. It is a study in how we grapple with the unknown. The real takeaway is not to believe every alternative story, but to understand why they emerge and why they resonate. It is a call for critical thinking, to question compelling narratives with the same rigor we apply to official ones, to weigh evidence, demand transparency, and embrace the beautiful, frustrating complexity of the past. So we turn the question to you. After this journey through shadows and secrets, which of these historical mysteries leaves you with the most lingering doubt? Which gap in the story feels the most deliberate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are fascinated by the lines between fact, legend, and the stories we choose to believe, be sure to subscribe. Our explorations into history's greatest puzzles are just beginning.